So I just think it's being able to speak up, and there's something about British women. I don't know what it is, but it's great.
So, Socialism Done Left has a question for VC. I'm going to unmute you.
Sure. So you've talked a lot about how women are losing rights, but we have a lot of empirical evidence that extending trans protections to trans women improves their mental health, and trans people in general improves their mental health. Do you have any evidence that extension of these protections systematically harms women?
What, men in women's spaces?
Yeah. Do you have any evidence?
What, the men in women's spaces?
No, not just men, specifically trans, right? You can say they're men, but they're also trans. Do you have any evidence that this inclusion causes harm on a statistical or systematic basis?
Yeah, of course. So the comfort of women. I don't know if you feel that that's.
Do you have a study on the comfort of women?
Comfortable.
No, do you have a study on that?
Well, I guess somebody without a penis can't rape women in this country by law. So you have prisoners put in women's prison in this country who have then gone on to sexually assault women.
Let's say this is true, right? We're talking about rates. Has the rate of these infractions gone up or gone down? Has sexual assault gone up or gone down? Do you have any evidence?
You'd have to give me the rate of how many men or trans women are in women's spaces and at what time for me to tell you.
Why would I need to provide the evidence if you're the one rejecting this? You're the one who's a TERF activist. Why do I need to prove your claims for you?
I'm telling you that I think trans women are men. That's the basis of everything I do. Now, if men are in women's spaces, and I can tell you, according to the transgender, which was a pro-trans study of transgender inmates in the Californian, or it might have been Texan jail, I can no longer remember, in 2009, I think the study was, that said that they don't lose criminality. That also said that actually there was a slight rise in the propensity to commit sexual violence. So we have one study that says that the rates of criminality, in fact, there are many that say the rates of criminality when somebody transitions, so whether or not that person calls themselves a trans woman or just is a man, their propensity to commit violence against anybody is exactly the same. So
yeah, sure. So that would be a neat study to provide. It's unfortunate you can't recall any of its details, but what are we supposed to take from it?
Expecting a constant assault, so I haven't brought everything along with me.
Okay.
We can talk about stuff afterwards, right?
Yeah, we can have a little talk afterwards. So there's a study in Massachusetts, right, which I can provide to you right now, which demonstrates that when Massachusetts localities, little counties within Massachusetts, passed laws allowing people to go into whatever bathroom they identify with, there was no increase in crimes in general or sexual crimes or voyeurism. So what do we conclude from this?
There was no rise in voyeurism.
Yep. None. I've also posted the study both in general or whatever and in your DMs if you want to read it.
So that's one study.
Yeah, one study of an entire state. The population of Massachusetts is 20 million.
Okay, and the population of trans women using women's toilets in Massachusetts?
Massachusetts has 7 million people. This is enormous. This is larger than some countries in Europe. What?
Okay.
I don't know what the portion of trans people that use bathrooms is. Presumably 100% because they gotta pee sometimes.
So how many of them are there?
I don't know. In general, just multiply 6 million by 0.05.
So
or
you
0.5,
know that there's 0.05. You know that there's 0.5.
Yeah, so there'd be 30,000 trans people in Massachusetts if you just multiply 0.5% by 6 million.
And all the women felt totally comfortable about those men being in their changing rooms and
Do you think that we should build policy based on how people feel or based on how reality actually is? Okay, so white people in America hate blacks. Should we discriminate against blacks because whites are scared of blacks?
How many white people hate blacks?
If it's 1%, does it matter? If you're building stuff based on feelings, so long as 1% hate blacks, we should hate blacks too as policy.
Do you think all men should be allowed to use women's toilets?
According to this study, it doesn't matter if they do. There's no negative effects, at least in terms of stuff that's actually in terms of crime.
So you think all men should be able to use women's toilets? You don't.
Ideally, it should be gender neutral.
Sex.
Oh, you were asking about trans people specifically. I don't know if it works for all men, but
okay. So, and the difference between a man and a trans woman is
For one, their gender identity, which like we can prove in numerous ways. They have different gender identity. They have different biology as a part of result of taking different hormones.
How do you measure
Sure,
identity?
there's a variety of surveys that we could take, and generally, people who are trans score above certain values on those surveys. So if you want, we can get into it. But
so women is just a case of values.
What? Okay, let's say it's just a case of values. And if we enact policy that it like favors these values, there's no impact on crime. Why would we care? If all of your claims are false, why do we care?
So a white Republican affluent woman has the same values as a Latino woman living in Florida in a small house.
Why does it matter that their values are different? It matters whether there are concrete impacts.
You just said gender identity could be measured by values. And then I just illustrated to you that actually, no, wait, let me finish. And I just said to you that women don't have the same values. So saying that gender identity, somebody is made a woman by their values is a ridiculous thing to say.
Okay, so then what makes a woman?
Biology.
Okay, so let's say that trans people have different brain structure than do okay, so do you want to reject those studies as well? Because there are meta studies on this, over like 20, 30 studies at this point.
Yeah, and there's loads of studies by neuroscientists who weren't trying to find a trans brain who will tell you that that's not true. That there's no difference between male and female brains.
Okay, well, they'd just be wrong.
The only difference is the size of the grey matter, and you can brains are very plastic.
Well, it seems like we're at an impasse when it comes to the studies, right? Like it all comes down to the studies. So after this event, we'll do a roundtable. You're welcome to stay for that once we get through the questions.
Female going through female puberty is a really hard time. Do we genuinely want to make those children, those girls, more uncomfortable for the validation of a man who calls himself a woman? I mean, do you think that little of girls?
Well, so I'm not when I like look at like whether or not we should do a policy. I don't look at necessarily just like the discomfort of like some people.
Well, you should.
It has to be. You do that? Well, because if I did that, then like I wouldn't desegregate like in the 60s, right? Because white women were like really uncomfortable around like black women. But that's one thing. So when I make a policy,
not all white women at all. That's ridiculous.
Otherwise,
it doesn't need to be all. It just needs to be most or many. Let's actually do it. What percent of women do you think are uncomfortable with trans women in their bathroom? What percent?
I find the fact that you are not even willing, either of you.
We actually have polls on this, by the way.
I haven't finished. I find the fact that neither of you are willing to think about vulnerable women, of which they are higher and greater in number than trans women, that vulnerable women who would not want trans women in their space, I find it questionable that you don't even consider them.
I do.
Tell me about the woman who suffered sexual assault who doesn't want men in her space.
Sure. So I asked you what percent it has to be, right? And you dodged the question. So is there a number?
Can I get the answer on the question? Just like the initial question, which is if we show that there is no actual like significant harm to women, like because like discomfort would count as like harm, right? But if there is no harm whatsoever. Wait, if we could, so I'm just asking like it's a philosophical question. If we could do that, would you be okay with like including trans women in public in like women's spaces?
No.
Why not? Why not?
Because they're men.
So what?
So I don't want men in women's space. Could you significantly ever prove that men aren't a threat to women in women's space?
Well, so right now I'm not saying that like that. So I'm just like posing a hypothetical. If we could show through studies or something similar to that it wasn't like an actual significant harm. I'm just asking would you be okay with it, or is it more a philosophical thing with you, where like you just don't want men in for some reason? It's like you have this arbitrary thing where like
whoever has a mic that's picking up Murphy Law's feedback, please mute yourself.
Okay, so if we reached as a society, if we reached a place where there was no sexual violence, where there was no voyeurism, no rape, no sexual assault, where men and women, and let's face it, I don't think that's ever going to happen, where men and women coexisted with no violence in between them that was of a sex-based violence, then I suspect as a race we would move past sex segregation, but we are not there.
So do you think, just as last question,
if hypothetically allowing them in the bathrooms would decrease rape, you would be okay with it?
I think that's such a bizarre question. It would, hypothetically, if I could circle the moon 3 times and become Superwoman, would I like to? It's not gonna. That's a ridiculous assumption, isn't it? Or a silly.
I agree. If it was something
preposition.
ridiculous like that, it would be. I 100% agree if it was something ridiculous. However, allowing trans women into women's bathroom actually decreases the likelihood of them being raped, and it doesn't increase the likelihood
No,
of
it
women
doesn't.
being
It
raped.
doesn't do anything for women, does it?
Oh, I'm sorry. For trans women, it decreases their likelihood of being raped, and it doesn't do. You're right. It doesn't do anything
How many
towards
trans women
women.
are
I
raped in
agree.
bathrooms? Sorry, how many?
As long as it's more than 0, it's still a decrease, right?
They have a higher likelihood of being raped than
in bathrooms.
cis women. So
In bathrooms.
in
Public
bathrooms,
Do you-
bathrooms.
yes, more
Yeah.
likely than women. Yeah.
And where do you get those statistics? Because that's patently not true.
Okay, I'm sure Commie Boy has the statistics that he can
I
provide.
don't have
Can I-
statistics
can I-
on rape
can I
in
ask-
bathrooms, right? To be clear, the vast majority of rape, something like 90%, occurs in the home setting anyway. So like
Okay.
very
so we
few.
can't guarantee.
But
Okay,
I do think that it is
like you were
important to
saying-
care about women's feelings. This is something I was trying to ask you about. So in Britain, right, which is actually one of the most trans-friendly countries in the world, something like 60% of people say that trans people should be able to use the bathroom they identify with. So if most women in Britain would be comfortable with this, do you think it's okay to do it? So to be clear, if 40% aren't comfortable, is that enough?
Right. Yeah, it is. Number one.
Okay,
yes,
then how
it
little is it? Is it
And
30?
hang on, wait. Let me finish. However, most people in the United Kingdom, and I've seen that particular poll by YouGov that Pink News published. The questions are quite incredible. It's like it was almost a question like, would you like a trans woman? Let's face it, most people think trans women don't have penises and are transsexuals. Would you think a trans woman should use a bathroom with a woman, or do you want them to get raped? It was
Okay,
questions that
so
were
if you're concerned with the
misleading.
questioning, if you're concerned with the misleadingness of the question, this is 2018 Ipsos. Quote, they should be allowed to use the restroom of the sex they identify with, unquote. Is that misleading?
Do you how many of those women do you think trans women were transsexuals?
Why did you dodge the question? Is this misleading or not? Will you accept this question?
Yes, it's misleading because people
How?
don't really know what they're talking about.
Okay, that's not misleading. That's just ignorance. Do you think there's like a difference between the two?
I think that most people in this country have no idea that most trans women are simply what we used to call transvestites.
Why are you so disrespectful?
Can I interject?
Sure.
as
So
a-
let's
as
say that this is true, right? What does it matter? If your argument is based on people's feelings, then if most people are ignorant, it doesn't matter what actually is true because they won't know that the transvestite next to them in the bathroom actually has a right. They won't know. They'll have no idea. Your argument necessarily follows that they won't be able to feel bad about this because they're ignorant.
You don't think that somebody who so I'll tell you what women think of transvestites in comparison to transsexuals. Most people recognize, and we'll talk as if we're 5 years ago, so people won't get very upset and offended by language. Most people would think a transvestite was a man who quite got off and enjoyed dressing as a woman, led by a sexual fetish, and most of that would come from transvestites themselves, who would say that sort of thing. Then you've got transsexuals, who would be people who just wanted to peacefully, quietly get on with their lives without being noticed, and possibly, if they were using women's toilets, they would want nobody to see them, and they would just quietly get on with it and just hope that they didn't come to any
Do you think
harm,
trans
right?
women walk into a woman's bathroom and just announce, I'm trans, everyone, I would just like to signal that I'm trans, and then go piss? What?
No, I think there's a significant difference between somebody who has actually transitioned and somebody who is just dressed as a woman. And I think most women can tell you the difference.
Okay, sure, let's say this is true. But again, your argument is about feelings, right? If most women are okay with this, it seems like, to be clear, in this Ipsos poll, only 22% of people in Great Britain said that trans people shouldn't be able to go into their bathroom.
How many women were surveyed?
probably around 3,000. That's like standard for these kind of surveys. What number would make you comfortable? If it were 4,000 would be fine. If it were 5,000 would be fine.
Probably if it was a referendum and if it was most of the population.
If it were a referendum.
Yeah.
So Kelly, as like a statistics major, right? There's something called the law of large numbers. You can get a statistically representative sample with only around 1,000 to 5,000 people. You don't need to survey half the population.
And so you're going to just say that teenage girls don't deserve their privacy? Is that right? You think my daughter doesn't deserve privacy?
Yeah, I think we should tear down all the private stalls and it should be one big pissing trough. No, private stalls. No one will even know.
Their privacy in the white bathrooms.
Why don't you care at all about the views of women?
I do. I'm asking you how few women need to care for you to be okay with this. 22% of people in Britain aren't okay with trans in their bathroom. So is that enough for you? What if it were 10%? 5%?
Not 22% of Britons. It's 22% of a survey that I don't even know what questions were asked.
I already told you the question, right? We walked through this. The sample size is probably irrelevant to your point because statistically it's more or less the same. And it's probably representative of the population as a whole.
You honestly think that a 6'4" man in a dress is okay to use women's bathrooms because an Ipsos survey said that most women were okay with it? Really?
Yeah.
Perhaps we could move on from the straw man arguments there.
What's the straw man here? She's the one saying that feelings are important. We need to care about the feelings of these like teenage women.
It's not a discussion only between you and her.
Sure, others can join in and talk about how much they value the feelings of the 22% of women in Britain.
Yeah,
if I could piggyback off.
People try to join in actually. So
could I piggyback off?
Let's let Java go.
Yeah. So I still don't think we got an answer to this question. Let's say that over half of the population, or let's say over half of white women were uncomfortable with black women being in their bathrooms. Would you be okay segregating them?
But black women aren't men, are they?
Can you just answer the question?
Would I be okay? No.
Why not?
Well, because there's no basis. It's.
But they're uncomfortable. Isn't that a basis? You said it was.
Are they? Yeah, but.
Well, they obviously are if they don't want them there.
Look, since the dawn of time and throughout my life, and I suspect yours, we both know that men are more likely to harm women than other women.
That's
we both
to the
know
question.
that the instinct. Well, I think it's a facetious question. I think what it seeks to do is make this notion that men cause women harm is some sort of weird prejudice that women have. That most women haven't really experienced some sort of unwanted sexual attention or advance from men. But that isn't true. Just because we progressed past being racist and ignorant about people, it doesn't. And I still don't think most people who actually encountered black people across both the USA and the United Kingdom, once most people had actually encountered people of different races, that they were still racist. I think people moved past that quite swiftly.
I'm saying if they were racist.
Pardon?
I'm saying if they were racist. Like, let's go back, I don't know, 50 years. Let's say there's some white women that are uncomfortable with black women in the bathrooms. You said earlier, and it's recorded, that being uncomfortable is a valid reason for trans women not going to the female bathroom. So why doesn't it extend to black women?
I really find it difficult that you want to equate the difference between the sexes and the way that women feel about men in their space with people that were racist.
Yeah, but
and
what's
it's
the
not
difference?
just about comfort. There's a real thing about comfort with men and women. Did you when you were a teenager, or how old are you?
21.
Right, you don't have kids. Okay. So when you have children, right, and they stop undressing freely in front of their parents, or they don't want their parents to undress, the first parent they find uncomfortable is their parent of the opposite sex. And so it's a natural phenomenon. It's something inbuilt in who we are as a species.
I thought it was the opposite.
Learning racism, right, is something that we teach people. The feeling about being different to the opposite sex is something that's innate. I think it's really bizarre, although not that bizarre, that your first concern is where trans people should be and not the impact of those men in women's spaces. And it doesn't matter if I tell you that those women are raped. It doesn't matter if I tell you those women are teenagers. It doesn't matter if I tell you those women are vulnerable, because those women don't seem to matter to your argument whatsoever.
But they do.
Can you even hear yourself?
Yeah, so I would say if you could offer those statistics, I don't think you have them, but if you could, I would like to see them, that these women are being raped, then yeah. But
but apparently trans women are being raped in toilets with men, which is why they need to be in women's toilets, but that's not true. Why are
anybody
trans
here
women not safe in men's toilets?
But just going back, if I can just finish, so yeah, like, then we can both agree that just being uncomfortable is not a valid justification for not allowing trans women.
Just being a man is a valid enough reason.
What if like can I just say one small thing? What if like we could show you stats that like black women maybe like the women in the 60s, they would like refer to stats and say, well, look, they maybe have like stats that show that black women commit a slightly higher crime than like white women, and so they would have like a valid justification. They say like, well, they're more likely to like commit crime, and they're also uncomfortable with.
Was it true?
I mean,
yes, it was.
Probably, yeah.
So black women did commit loads of crime against white women.
That's, I mean, so I don't know about loads of crime, but probably more so than like white women against white women. So would that be like a valid enough justification to segregate? Do you think?
In the United Kingdom, we have 12,000 men. Out of a prison population of 80,000 men, we have 12,000 of them that are for sexual violence against women and children. The population of female prisoners in total, and most of them will be victims of crime and sexual abuse themselves, is 3,000. Do you want to tell me that that is not a valid enough reason to appreciate that men can cause women harm? Or are we going to keep trying to relate whatever my argument is to some peculiar thing that's 70 years old about people who used to be racist? Is it not enough that some men, and I don't know who, wait, I haven't finished. Is it not enough that some men, and I can't tell you which ones they are until they commit crime, cause women and children harm, and that is a good enough reason to say that men of any description are not allowed in women's space?
So if I understand correctly, you're saying that like it's about the amount of crime committed. So if back in the like the 60s, if black women committed more crime comparable to that of like men against women, then you would be okay with segregation, right?
If I lived in the 1960s, and there was some bizarre thing that meant black women were committing sexual crimes against white women to the tune of 400% in comparison to the crime that all white women committed. I'm not even going to honor that with an answer. That's a ridiculous question.